Major Steele, these medals are not yours. They are lies stolen from real heroes. And today, we strip them away. In the echoing chamber of Washington, Major Aurora Steele sat in silence. Cameras flashed, politicians smirked, and the committee tore at her record piece by piece. For hours she remained still, unable to defend herself, because the truth was locked behind walls of secrecy. Then the floor trembled. A low rumble shook the tall windows. Glasses rattled on the table. Secret Service agents stormed in, scanning every corner with urgency. And in stunned silence, the President of the United States walked through those doors. Not for them, but for her. Why would the most powerful man alive stop everything, just to stand beside a woman the world called a fraud? The clock above the chamber doors ticked with an almost mocking patience. Every second that passed stretched the tension tighter, until it felt as if the very air in the room was ready to snap. At the front of the committee table stood Prosecutor Dana Kessler, her suit immaculate, her voice sharp and rehearsed like a blade honed for a single purpose. Major Steele, Kessler began, holding up a folder thick with documents, your service record claims deployment to active combat zones that, according to these reports, you never once set foot in. These medals, she gestured toward the glittering row on Aurora's chest, are awarded for valor under fire. Yet official logs place you stateside in administrative duty during those exact periods. Her words were designed not just to accuse, but to humiliate. The cameras caught every angle, feeding the spectacle to living rooms across the nation. Kessler paced deliberately, heels striking the wooden floor with sharp echoes, as if every step were another nail hammered into Aurora's reputation. Behind her, Congressman Victor Harlow leaned into his microphone, lips curled in satisfaction. Harlow thrived on the theater of scandal. He had built his public persona on exposing frauds, a crusader of truth in his own eyes, though many quietly acknowledged he pursued headlines more than justice. Today was his stage, and Aurora Steele, decorated officer, silent defendant, was the perfect target. "Tell me, Major," Harlow said, his voice heavy with false politeness, "how does someone with an administrative background manage to collect commendations that soldiers with decades of frontline service rarely touch? Unless, of course, those commendations are the product of exaggeration?" The gallery rippled with murmurs. Reporters' pens scratched furiously against their notepads. The accusation wasn't subtle, it was theatrical, meant to sting, to echo through the nightly news. Aurora's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Her hands remained folded on the table, steady, scarred knuckles resting atop each other like stones unmoved by the current. Her silence was not weakness, it was discipline. But in that chamber, silence was being twisted into guilt. Kessler pressed further. She produced photographs from ceremonies, enlargements mounted on boards for the cameras to catch. "Staged," she suggested, her tone dripping with condescension. Witnesses had been summoned, some claiming never to have seen Aurora in the field, others insisting her name had never appeared in combat rosters. Each statement chipped away at her image, and the public watching at home would see only one narrative, a soldier caught in the act of deception. Yet there was something deeper here, something older. Beneath the legal arguments and stage indignation lurked a prejudice that history had not yet fully shed, the suspicion of women in uniform. For generations, women in the armed forces had been underestimated, dismissed, or accused of climbing through favors rather than merit. The words changed over time, but the undertone remained the same. Prove yourself twice, be believed half as much. Every barrier broken was followed by new whispers of fraud or favoritism. And in this hearing room, Aurora Steele was facing not only accusations against her record, but centuries of inherited doubt. Harlow played to that bias with skill. "We all respect service," he said sanctimoniously, "but respect does not excuse fabrication. And if a soldier, especially one so publicly decorated, manipulates the system for personal glory, what does that do to the credibility of every honest woman who serves?" The line was calculated. It painted Aurora not only as a liar, but as a traitor to her gender, someone whose supposed fraud would harm the progress of women across the military. It was a masterstroke of political theater, and a devastating blow to anyone watching who longed for fairness. Aurora did not rise to defend herself. She could not. Every classified mission she had taken part in, every risk she had endured, was locked behind a wall of secrecy that she had sworn to protect. To break that oath, even in the face of slander, would be to endanger the very people she had served alongside. So she remained silent. To those who did not understand, her silence looked like admission. To those who sought spectacle, it looked like surrender. Yet within her silence lay a truth more powerful than any testimony: loyalty to the mission above loyalty to herself. The cameras, however, could not capture that nuance. The television audience saw only a woman accused and refusing to answer. They saw Kessler's pointed gestures, Harlow's smug interruptions, the gallery's smirks. And they believed what they were told, that Major Aurora Steele had lied her way to honor. Hours dragged on this way. Kessler would present a contradiction, Harlow would twist the knife with insinuation, and Aurora would sit, still and unmoving. Her presence became a paradox. The decorated officer stripped of voice, the alleged liar who would not defend herself. It was in that paradox that the tension built. Every second her silence continued, the room filled with a mixture of smug certainty and frustrated confusion. The accusers thought they had her cornered. The audience thought the story was already written. And yet, outside those tall windows, history was beginning to stir. Engines rumbled on the streets of Washington, tires grinding against pavement. The hearing was about to collide with something far larger than its orchestrated humiliation. For now, though, in those long minutes of accusation, Aurora Steele endured alone, silent, scarred, and unbroken. The accusations did not slow. If anything, they gathered speed, like a storm feeding on its own momentum. Every statement was harsher than the last, every insinuation more venomous. Prosecutor Dana Kessler delivered her words like steady hammer blows, while Congressman Victor Harlow added theatrical flourishes for the cameras. Together, they built a narrative of deceit so convincing that, to the untrained eye, Major Aurora Steele appeared already condemned. Her medals were displayed on enlarged boards, their gleam twisted into evidence of theft. Testimonies were read from supposed comrades who swore they had never seen her beyond the safety of base walls. Even her scars, visible proof of battles fought in shadows, were mocked as unverified injuries. The gallery chuckled, the committee nodded, and Aurora sat unmoving. But in the silence between accusations, another observer worked quietly. Marin Duval, a journalist with an instinct for detail, scribbled furiously into her leather-bound notebook. Unlike the others, she did not watch Aurora for weakness. She watched the accusers for cracks. She noticed it first in Kessler's timeline. Deployment logs, the prosecutor declared, place Major Steele on American soil during Operation Blackstone. Yet Marin's sharp eyes caught that the dates cited overlapped with Aurora's official leave records. Records Kessler conveniently omitted. She underlined it twice. Then came the testimony of a retired officer claiming Aurora had never left the forward operating base. Marin frowned. She had covered enough military hearings to know when a statement was rehearsed. The phrasing was too polished, too consistent with earlier leaks. She jotted down a single note. Cover story? As the accusations stacked higher, Marin leaned closer, whispering to herself, "None of this adds up." Meanwhile, Aurora remained a statue at her table. Her silence was not born of fear, but of duty. Every classified mission she had undertaken was wrapped in layers of secrecy. To speak of them would compromise ongoing operations and endanger those still serving. The cruel irony was that her loyalty, the very quality for which she deserved honor, was now being used against her. It is easy to misinterpret silence. To the committee, it looked like surrender. To the cameras, it looked like guilt. But for those who understood the weight of secrecy, silence is often the loudest answer. A soldier sworn to protect missions invisible to the public carries a burden civilians rarely grasp. You cannot defend yourself with classified truths. You cannot wave classified documents like shields. You endure. The tension in the room became suffocating. Each pause between Kessler's attacks stretched longer, inviting Aurora to respond. Each second she refused only deepened the sneers. And yet in that restraint was a form of defiance. She would not betray her oath, not even to save her own name. There is a unique loneliness in that kind of silence. Imagine being surrounded by voices tearing you apart, knowing the truth could shatter their lives in an instant, but also knowing that revealing it would destroy the very people you once swore to protect. That was the battlefield Aurora Steele found herself on, more brutal than any she had known overseas. The audience in the gallery whispered gleefully. Reporters smirked as they prepared their headlines. Stolen Valor case unfolds live would play well across evening broadcasts. But Marin Duval saw something else. She saw the way Aurora's hands pressed together until her knuckles whitened. She saw the flicker of pain across her eyes each time an untruth was presented as fact. These were not the tells of a liar. They were the scars of someone enduring a punishment she could never answer. Marin's pen scratched across the page. Her silence is not weakness, it's duty. She thought of the women she had interviewed over the years. Pilots who were told they lacked the instinct for combat, medics dismissed as assistants, intelligence officers doubted simply because they were not men. Each had carried the extra burden of proving themselves twice as competent, twice as resilient. And now Aurora Steele was enduring the cruelest test of all, being asked to prove the unprovable. Commentators outside would later debate the optics of that silence. But in that chamber, Marin understood something the others missed. Silence itself was Aurora's testimony, and in its own way it screamed louder than any words could have. Harlow leaned into his microphone once more, savoring the spotlight. Major Steele, you sit before us decorated in honors you cannot explain, accused by those who served beside you, and yet you offer not a word in your own defense. The American people deserve an answer. Will you continue this charade of silence? Aurora lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes for the first time. The room seemed to pause. For a heartbeat, it looked as if she might speak. But then she turned her attention forward again, lips sealed, her oath unbroken. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Kessler faltered, caught off guard by the weight of her refusal. For the briefest moment, the chamber was forced to reckon with the truth Marin had already grasped, that some secrets were too great for even self-preservation to breach. That silence became Aurora Steele's most powerful statement. It was a silence that said, I will not betray my comrades. I will not compromise the mission. You may strip my name, but you will not take my honor. And outside those tall windows, the world prepared to intrude. The faint rumble of engines was growing closer, unnoticed by the accusers, but felt in the slight vibration of glass and table legs. The silence inside was about to collide with a revelation no committee could contain. The chamber had become a theater of humiliation. For hours, the committee feasted on accusation. Prosecutor Dana Kessler's voice had grown sharp with triumph, while Congressman Victor Harlow leaned back in his chair, satisfied that he was dismantling Major Aurora Steele in front of a national audience. Then, without warning, a faint tremor rippled through the floor. At first, it was almost imperceptible, the kind of vibration dismissed as imagination. But seconds later, it returned, stronger this time. The glasses of water on the committee's table quivered. The microphones buzzed faintly, as if stirred by unseen thunder. Kessler hesitated mid-sentence. A few heads in the gallery turned toward the tall windows that lined the chamber. The low, guttural rumble of heavy engines rolled closer, vibrating against the marble floor. "What is that noise?" Harlow muttered, irritation creasing his face. He tapped his microphone, annoyed at the distraction. "Order will be maintained," he barked. But the noise did not subside. It grew louder, unmistakably the synchronized thunder of armored vehicles. Someone in the gallery gasped as shadows passed across the window light. Black SUVs, a convoy. The atmosphere shifted. Reporters exchanged uneasy glances. The steady rhythm of engines outside seemed alien in the sanctity of this hearing room. Then it happened. The double doors at the rear of the chamber burst open. A flood of Secret Service agents swept inside. Dark suits pressed, earpieces in place, their movements swift and controlled. "Clear the aisles! Secure the room!" one barked. The committee froze in indignation. "What is the meaning of this interruption?" Harlow demanded, his face flushed. "We are conducting official business." But the agents ignored him. They fanned out with trained precision, eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. Their presence was overwhelming, radiating authority beyond politics. For the first time that day, the room's power dynamics shifted. Aurora Steele, still seated at her lonely table, lifted her gaze. She had faced ambushes before. She knew the cadence of approaching force. Yet even she was unprepared for what came next. A hush fell over the room as the lead agent raised his hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice calm yet commanding, "the President of the United States." A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. The gallery rose to its feet in reflexive shock. Cameras swung toward the doorway, bulbs flashing furiously. And then he appeared. President Jonathan Keaton, tall and composed, stepped through the doors with deliberate stride. His presence filled the room instantly, not because of the title he carried, but because of the weight in his expression. This was no ceremonial entrance. This was a mission. At his side walked General Helena Strauss, her uniform a stark reminder of the military authority behind this intrusion. Secret Service agents flanked them like shadows, but it was Keaton's gaze that drew every eye. He did not look at the committee, nor at the cameras. His eyes fixed on one person, and one person only, Major Aurora Steele. For the first time all day, Aurora's composure wavered. It was only a flicker. Her shoulders straightened, her lips parted slightly. She had expected isolation until the bitter end. She had not expected this. The room fell into stunned silence. Even Harlow, ever eager for a microphone, was struck speechless. Kessler shuffled her papers frantically, as if searching for some legal anchor in the storm that had just entered. Keaton stopped at the center of the chamber. His voice, when he spoke, carried the calm gravity of a man who had seen history bend and break. 6 years ago, he began, when I was still a senator, I traveled on a diplomatic mission to a region I cannot name here. Our convoy was ambushed. Official records show I was never there. He let the words hang, each syllable landing like a stone in water. But I was, and I survived because of one person, Major Aurora Steele. Gasps filled the chamber. Kessler paled. Harlow's face drained of color. Reporters scrambled to capture every word, their pens scratching desperately. The silence after his statement was deafening. The accusations hurled for hours now crumbled in the face of a truth only the president could speak. Keaton turned slowly toward the committee. You sit here questioning the honor of an officer who cannot defend herself because her service is buried in classified files. You have mocked her silence as guilt, when in reality it is loyalty. Loyalty to missions you cannot comprehend, and to comrades whose lives still depend on that silence. Aurora lowered her eyes briefly, the smallest sign of relief crossing her face. After hours of humiliation, someone had finally spoken the truth aloud. General Strauss stepped forward, her voice clipped and firm. Colonel Hurrian, the officer who testified against Steele, was part of her cover. He was ordered to maintain it at all costs. His words here today are exactly what he was instructed to say, if ever questioned. He followed orders. She followed orders. And this committee, her gaze swept across the panel, has endangered classified operations by demanding explanations that cannot be given. The weight of her words crashed through the chamber. Reporters who had been ready to declare Aurora a fraud now scribbled furiously about betrayal, secrecy, and presidential vindication. Aurora remained seated, but her silence now carried a different meaning. No longer the silence of accusation. It was the silence of vindication. Her restraint had been justified. Her duty had been honored. Harlow stammered, trying to reclaim authority. Mr. President, this committee was unaware. Keaton cut him off, his tone sharpened. Unaware or unwilling to recognize the possibility that some heroes cannot tell their stories, that some sacrifices remain in the shadows, known only to those who lived them? The congressman shrank under his gaze. Cameras captured every second, the humiliation now shifting sides. The chamber that had once echoed with laughter at Aurora's expense now sat in reverent silence. A soldier accused of fraud was, in a single moment, revealed as the unseen protector of the president himself. And though Aurora spoke no words, the room finally heard her silence for what it was, the sound of loyalty, louder than any defense she could have given. The hearing chamber was frozen in disbelief. For hours, accusations had been hurled at Major Aurora Steele with calculated precision. Yet in a matter of seconds, President Jonathan Keaton's words had inverted the narrative. The silence was so thick that one could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above. the soft rustle of reporters repositioning in their seats, desperate to capture this moment in history. Keaton stood tall, his voice steady, but his eyes betrayed memory. Scenes burned into him that no camera would ever see. "I remember it as if it were yesterday," he said, looking past the committee to a place far away. "The night our convoy was ambushed, I was certain I would never see dawn. Gunfire erupted from every ridge, smoke filled the air, and the desert itself felt like it wanted to swallow us whole. My security detail was overwhelmed. We were outnumbered, outflanked, and doomed." He paused, letting the weight of his words hang. The journalists leaned forward, pens poised, lenses zooming. Keaton turned his gaze toward Aurora, still seated in silence, her posture rigid. "And then," he continued, "she appeared. Major Aurora Steele. Alone, cut off from her unit, but relentless. She dragged me from the wreckage of my vehicle, shielded me with nothing but her own body, and led me through hell to safety. I stand here today, alive, because of her." A ripple of gas spread through the gallery. Aurora did not move. Her hands remained folded, but her eyes, those weary eyes, closed for the briefest moment, as though a weight long carried had just been acknowledged by the one man whose life proved it true. Keaton's tone hardened as he addressed the committee directly. "The reason you will not find this mission in her official record is because it was classified beyond your clearance. Every trace of her involvement was erased deliberately, not to punish her, but to protect the operation, the identities of those involved, and the fragile alliances at stake. She was never meant to defend herself against your accusations, because the truth was never meant to be revealed in public." Prosecutor Dana Kessler sat pale, her notes trembling in her hands. Congressman Harlow looked as though the ground beneath him had collapsed, his bravado shattered. The cameras, once allies in their performance, now turned against them, documenting their humiliation. Aurora kept her silence, but her very stillness now radiated something different. It was no longer the silence of someone cornered. It was the silence of a warrior who had carried the unbearable and endured. General Helena Strauss, who had accompanied the president, stepped forward. Her presence was formidable, her words sharper than any blade. To preserve that mission, every officer who might be questioned was given a cover story, she revealed. Even her former commanding officer, Colonel Hrien, was instructed to deny her combat involvement if asked. He was ordered to play his part, just as she was ordered to keep her silence. The testimony you heard today was not betrayal, it was obedience. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Reporters furiously scribbled notes, trying to reconcile the day's narrative. Aurora's so-called fraud had, in fact, been loyalty of the highest order. Strauss's voice rose, commanding the room. "This woman has endured ridicule, suspicion, and disgrace because she chose to keep faith with her orders. She has carried scars you cannot see, and some you can, because she valued the lives of her comrades and the safety of her country more than her own reputation." She turned sharply toward the prosecutors. "And you dared to call her a liar?" For once, Dana Kessler had no retort. Her legal eloquence failed in the face of truth. Harlow shifted uncomfortably, searching for some rhetorical foothold, but none remained. President Keaton let the silence stretch before speaking again. His voice softened now, filled with a quiet conviction. "There are sacrifices made in the shadows that the public will never know. There are names engraved only in secret memorials, stories that can never be told. Major Steele belongs to that brotherhood of the unseen, those who risk everything without expectation of recognition. And we, the very nation they protect, too often repay them with doubt." He looked to Aurora again, and this time his tone carried something personal, something raw. "I owe my life to you. The world owes its stability to men and women like you. Silent guardians whose deeds will never make the headlines. But today, at least, they will know your name." Aurora met his gaze, her lips tightening as if to speak, but she remained still. She could not confirm his account, nor expand upon it. Her oath remained unbroken. Yet in that silence, everyone in the room understood. Moraine Duval, watching from her corner with notebook in hand, felt a shiver run through her. She saw it clearly now, the paradox of heroism hidden behind walls of secrecy. She scribbled a line she knew would headline her eventual article. Some wars are fought in silence, and some victories must remain unseen. In that moment, the chamber was transformed. What had begun as a trial of disgrace had become a testament to sacrifice. Aurora's silence, once mocked, now thundered with meaning. Every camera captured her stoic figure. Every flash immortalized her restraint. The committee, once so eager to strip her honors, now sat diminished, chastened by the revelation. They had not unmasked a fraud. They had exposed their own blindness to the cost of secrecy. President Keaton closed with words that would echo far beyond those walls. Let this hearing serve as a reminder. The heroes who stand in the light are not the only ones who keep us safe. There are those who will never receive applause, who cannot defend themselves with words, who carry their duty quietly and bear their scars alone. Major Aurora Steele is one of them, and for every Aurora Steele, there are countless others whose names we may never know. The chamber remained silent, reverent. Aurora, unmoved, simply bowed her head slightly. She had not sought this defense, nor this recognition. She had only done her duty. And though the world now saw a fragment of her truth, she knew most of it would forever remain locked away, hidden in classified files and unspoken memories. That was the price of being a silent guardian, and it was a price she had always been willing to pay. The hearing chamber emptied slowly, its echoes carrying the weight of what had just unfolded. The committee members who had once relished in tearing Aurora Steele apart, now left with their heads bowed, their certainty shattered. The cameras that had been poised to broadcast her humiliation had instead captured her vindication. Aurora remained at the center of it all, still seated at the long wooden table. For the first time that day, her posture relaxed slightly. Vindication had come not from her own words, but from the voice of the president and the authority of General Helena Strauss. She had been defended not with arguments, but with truth. And though much of that truth would remain sealed in classified archives, the accusations against her had been silenced. In the gallery, Miranda Duval packed away her notebook. She had watched everything with the eye of a journalist and the heart of a witness to history. That evening, as the city lights of Washington glowed against the night sky, she began to write the article that would ripple across the nation. Its title carried the resonance of what she had seen, The Heroes We Cannot Know. Her piece did not sensationalize the classified mission or speculate on what details could never be revealed. Instead, it focused on the larger truth, the reality that there are countless men and women whose service is never recognized because their stories must remain hidden. She described the silence Aurora carried, the dignity in her refusal to betray secrets even when her honor was stripped away. She framed Aurora not as a victim of false accusation, but as a symbol of all those who serve in the shadows. The article spread quickly, shared in military circles, classrooms, and households. It stirred debate. How many other soldiers had endured similar treatment? How many had taken their secrets to the grave, never acknowledged, never thanked? In the weeks that followed, the impact of Aurora's case grew. Public pressure mounted on lawmakers to address the blind spot that allowed classified veterans to be tried and doubted in open hearings. President Keaton, determined to ensure no one else endured what Aurora had faced, introduced legislation with General Strauss's support. It became known as the Classified Service Recognition Act. The law established protected procedures for evaluating the records of veterans whose missions could not be publicly disclosed. It created secure channels where their service could be validated without compromising national security. Most importantly, it recognized that silence did not equal deceit, that the absence of evidence in public files could itself be evidence of sacrifice. Aurora attended the signing of the act quietly, standing at the edge of the Rose Garden ceremony. While generals, senators, and journalists applauded, she remained still, her expression calm. Recognition was never what she had sought, yet as she watched the president's pen carve his signature, she allowed herself the smallest breath of relief. Perhaps her ordeal would mean fewer silent guardians would have to suffer the same fate. Marin's article became part of the national conversation. Scholars cited it in discussions about civil-military trust. Veterans groups rallied around it to demand respect for those who could not speak of their deeds. For many, Major Aurora Steele became a living reminder that not all heroes wear their history on their sleeves. Some carried it in silence, hidden beneath scars and sealed files. Aurora herself remained unchanged. She did not seek interviews or bask in her sudden fame. She returned to her duties, continuing to serve in quiet ways, as she always had. Yet within military circles, her name became a whisper of respect. Young officers spoke of her case as a lesson in loyalty, that sometimes the greatest courage is not in speaking, but in holding one's silence against unbearable pressure. The message was clear. Society must learn to honor the unseen. For every soldier decorated in public ceremonies, there are others who can never step into the spotlight. Their heroism is buried in classified archives, their sacrifices known only to a handful of commanders and comrades. They walk among us anonymously, their stories untold, yet their contributions no less vital. As dust settled over Washington weeks later, Aurora visited Arlington Cemetery. She walked quietly among the rows of white stones until she reached one marked only by a name known to her alone, a comrade who had died on the same mission where she saved the future president. She placed her hand on the cold marble and whispered, "They finally know a little, but the rest will stay ours." And that was enough for her, because true service, she understood, is not about recognition. It is about duty. And the silent heroes, the ones history can never fully record, deserve our reverence all the same. Major Aurora Steele's story is not just about one soldier. It is about the hidden truth that every nation carries: quiet sacrifices, unseen acts of courage, lives dedicated to duty without recognition. Her words remain a lesson for us all. True success is when no one ever knows what you did, and yet your country is safe. Think about it in our everyday lives. How many silent heroes walk among us? The grandmother who raised a family alone without ever asking for applause. The neighbor who looks after a veteran next door but never posts it online. The teacher who spends her own money to make sure a child has books. None of them will make the evening news. But aren't they just as vital as the stories we celebrate? In America today, where fame often overshadows service, Aurora's silence reminds us of a deeper truth: that dignity often lives in the quiet corners, where no spotlight reaches. And perhaps the real measure of a society is whether it values those quiet sacrifices as much as its public triumphs. So I want to hear from you. Do you believe our culture honors silent sacrifice enough? Or are we too focused on celebrating only the visible victories? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it so others can reflect with us. Together, let's keep alive the voices and silences of heroes we may never fully know.